We're good to go. All technical problems have been resolved. So we're going to start with Senate Bill 131. I've got Jody Chilson up here on behalf of the Senate President and here on behalf of the Department of Legislative Services on Senate Bill 131. Ms. Chilson, it's all yours to describe Senate Bill 131.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Feldman and members of the committee. My name is Jody Chilson. I'm an assistant manager in bill drafting for the Department of Legislative Services, and I coordinated the project that led to Senate Bill 131. And thank you for this opportunity to explain that project and process to you. In statute, every 4 years, the department is required to review all the mandated reports that are required to be submitted to the General Assembly and the governor, and we have to do that before the beginning of each new General Assembly term. So this review was undertaken last interim. The review consists of reviewing the tracking reports provided by the DLS library. They are charged with tracking all of those requirements. And then we contact the entities that are supposed to report for their recommendations on the reporting requirements. Under statute, we are required to focus on determining whether the reports are obsolete, duplicative, impractical, inefficient, or otherwise unnecessary. And in light of the recommendations we receive in our own research, we then determine whether any changes to the reporting requirements need to be made. As required at the end of the review, we submit a report to the Legislative Policy Committee. This year's report contained 42 recommendations, and the report also includes draft legislation to implement the recommendations. And of course, that turned into Senate Bill 131. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Well, I had one question. One question that came up to me during the interim was from our university system, that they said that we've put a lot of extra reporting requirements on them over the years, and that, was becoming somewhat problematic in terms of them carrying out their core mission. Is there anything in here that deals with that topic, reduces some of the reporting requirements on the University of Maryland system?
So there are some changes from the University System of Maryland that we did for them. I can't remember off the top of my head exactly what they were, but to the extent we can, we do try to consolidate or eliminate some of the reports if they find them overly burdensome and there doesn't seem to be any legislative interest anymore. We don't totally give the entities like free rein to be like, oh, repeal this or repeal that. So, and we're open, of course, if legislators have suggestions or want us to look into something, we can always do that.
Okay, any additional questions for the witness? We're talking about Senate Bill 131 and the mandated report bill revisions. Okay, seeing that concludes the bill hearing on Senate Bill 131. And thank you for your testimony. We're going to now move to Senate Bill 157. Is Senator Waldstreicher? He's on way. He's stuck in that. Okay, well, we've got Justin Fiore. Is Mr. Fiore here? Signed up as part of his sponsor panel. Don't see Mr. Fiore from MML. Why don't we do this? Yeah, let's why don't we go to the next bill and we can come back to unless Senator Waldstreicher. Oh, he's here. Okay, just in the nick of time. We were going to go to another bill and we're searching for Mr. Fiore, who also just showed up. So the timing here is perfect. Senate Bill 157. We've got Senator Waldstreicher and his sponsor companion panelist, Justin Fiore from MML. And Senator Waldstreicher, you have the time you need to present the bill, Senate Bill 157.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's a pleasure to call you that. It's a pleasure to be here. This committee room is a little quieter than my committee room today. Chairman Feldman, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee, Senate Bill 157 deals with an issue that most of us are familiar with. As many of you know, our municipal corporations need to provide certain notices in newspapers of record. This is an issue the General Assembly has been grappling with for many years, as smaller newspapers in our communities have shuttered. These papers include in Montgomery County, the Montgomery County Sentinel and the Gazette. Today, our municipalities must turn to larger newspapers, such as the Washington Post and the Baltimore Sun, to place their notices. This presents a couple of problems. First, very few people continue to receive physical newspapers, so these notices are not even being seen. Second, as a result of their increased market share, these larger newspapers enjoy local monopolies over these legally mandated notices. The General Assembly has considered in the past proposals to move these notices online. The problem with these proposals, which I support in part, is that not everyone has access to the internet, so it raises an equity issue. This digital divide could accidentally leave our most vulnerable citizens without access to information about the municipalities in which they reside. That's why I work with my local municipalities and the Maryland Municipal League to come up with a solution to our diminishing local newspapers. Senate Bill 173 offers a straightforward remedy. If a municipality is considering a charter amendment, they can simply mail notification of that amendment to their residents. They can also include it in a newsletter, so long as that newsletter is mailed to all residents of the municipality. Senate Bill 173 would allow for personal delivery as well. This bill is thoughtful, effective, and a good way for smaller municipalities to keep their residents apprised of charter amendments. I respectfully urge a favorable report.
Okay, any questions for the sponsor before we move to Mr. Fiore? Okay, we'll start with Senator Watson and we'll move around after that. Senator Watson.
Thank you, Senator Wall-Striker. One question. The means of notification. For example, my district, we really don't have a newspaper, right? And so what you're saying is that everything would have to rely on digital. So when you talk about a newsletter, that's kind of a push service from the sender's perspective, right? And so the onus is literally on the recipient or the intended recipient to open that up, the assuredness that it doesn't go into spam. What is the litmus test to say that we have successfully satisfied this criteria? Is it making an attempt? Is it looking at a percentage of opens? How would you deal with that?
Thank you, Senator Watson. So this bill does not deal with electronic delivery. That has been the issue that we have fallen into previously, that not everyone has access to the internet or have the technical ability to open PDFs. This simply allows the physical delivery of newsletters from the municipality directly to their residents. So more would get it than under the newspaper model. But this wouldn't prohibit municipalities from utilizing the newspaper model if for some reason that was most comfortable to them.
Yeah, so my district doesn't have really a newspaper to speak of. So of course, the goal is 100% of your residents get access to this and get the notification. What is the minimum criteria for saying that you've reached a critical mass? Because obviously, whatever you do is not going to hit each and every one of your residents. It's just not going to happen. So what is that minimum criteria? If we go down this path that I can say, here's the minimum you need, Prince George's County, to satisfy this notification criteria.
So the law as written on page 2 of the bill, line 8 and 9 indicates every residence. So each municipality has a list of addresses that are included within that municipality.
Mhm.
They would be required under this bill, if they choose not to utilize a newspaper, to instead send the charter amendment or a newsletter that includes the charter amendment to every resident.
And the newspaper has to be written, not online Capital Gazette, not online Maryland Matters, but a physical, tangible newspaper, correct?
Under current law, that is how municipalities do it. I believe those newspapers also publish those notifications online. But what is satisfying the current law and what is for many municipalities too expensive and not seen enough is the publication of these notices in physical newspapers.
Okay, we'll go Senator Augustine. And Senator Lewis-Sung, did you have a question or? Okay, Senator Augustine.
All right, thank you. Thank you, sponsor, for bringing it. The only question that I have is we're going from 4 communications, if I understand it, to 1 communication. I understand that you're able to reach a different audience, but it has to be listed 4 times, right? And so I just, how are we dealing with the fact that you may or may not see like the one time when you get your, and then also just the timing, let's say,
Sure.
like of the newsletters and stuff like that.
I think that's a fair question. My understanding is that the reason under current law, you are required to do it 4 times is because most people aren't reading a physical newspaper every day. Now, very few people, period, are reading a few, but the idea, I think, previously when newspapers were widely circulated in paper is that, well, you miss it once, there's 4 other opportunities. By requiring them to do it once in a newspaper and physically delivering it to the residents, either through the mail or through personal delivery, is that because of that second option, you no longer need to worry that they are not receiving it. You know that they've received it either through the US mail or through personal delivery.
Okay, any additional questions for the sponsor before we move to the sponsor panelist? Okay, Mr. Fiore from Maryland Municipal League, you've got 2.5 minutes.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Justin Fiore here on behalf of the Maryland Municipal League, and today in support of Senate Bill 157. Great bill number. Actually, we have 157 municipalities in the state. I love it. I want to thank the sponsor for bringing this really important bill. This is the bill that you would have received last year, passed out of the House unanimously. Actually, when we talk about the number of public notices that are put out, in this case with charter amendment, it's the only instance that I'm aware of where there's more than 2. A lot of different public notices require 2 different outreaches. This is the only one I'm aware of on the books that's 4, and it is in the newspaper. I brought a copy just to kind of give you a sense of where these are buried here. This is a very good newspaper, but you have to go into the sports section, and then at the back end of the sports section, you'll see just a block text of 6 to 8 point font. And right now, this is where we're putting these public notices. And we're saying we need to do it 4 times. By contrast, this bill allows a municipality to take that approach 1 time with an additional touch, which is a personal delivery or via mail or by hand to every single residence. Now, which one am I going to read more? The one that shows up on my doorstep for sure. This one, municipalities, I think for the Washington Post, to do 4 publications is about $2,000. And then you have to have a subscription to the paper to get it as well. So that's a lot for the taxpayer. I think this is a win-win bill where taxpayers are paying less to get these public notifications, and they're more likely to see them because they're showing up at their doorstep in a format that's easier for them to read. So I think it's an engagement win and a really good bill. We urge a favorable report.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Fiore? Senator Carrozza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Vice Chair Wall-Striker, for the bill, and thank you for presenting for MML. My question is 2 quick questions with MML, and I know you know this is probably coming. I wanted to make sure there's not a split between the bigger municipalities and the smaller ones. I see the city of Rockville, and I understand why they would request it. So I want to make sure the smaller ones, I represent 11 municipalities in my 3-county district. And 2, do you envision that this is not a burden on the smaller municipalities because they would be sending this information out in notices that they already have to mail to their residents? I'm just trying to make sure that it's not, I'm thinking, if there's regular notices going out, that maybe then there's not a cost involved for this. So that's where I'm headed with this. Really want to make some sensitivity to the smaller municipalities.
Thank you for the question. We actually anticipate this is going to help the smaller municipalities more. Right now, we think it's probably more economically feasible for a small jurisdiction to do the mailing costs associated with option 2. For a larger municipality, maybe even the likes of Rockville or the city of Frederick, it probably will still be more affordable for them to do this in the newspaper 4 times. It's going to be the communities and the vice chair's district that are maybe households of 250 households that already do a public mailing that are really going to see the savings benefit. But I think the delivery benefit of being in front of every household is a benefit to all municipalities.
You're clear that the smaller municipalities are on board and it will not be an additional cost to them.
Correct. It'll be a cost savings to the majority of them.
This was brought to me. So I represent in one legislative district 8 municipalities. They are all very tiny, and they were the ones who brought this to me.
Okay, Senator Watson.
One final question. So I'm just still wrapped around the newspaper piece because Capital Gazette, Post, Bowie Blade, Gazette, everything has moved to digital, everything. Have you all taken into consideration the ability to provide notice via robocall? So in Prince George's County, our county has been very effective sending those types of notifications out in cases of emergency. I agree with you, this is a big deal and everyone should be notified. But has any consideration been given to robocalls?
I'm open to that idea.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any additional questions for either panelists? Senator Augustine, who I know represents how many
I was
municipalities?
gonna say that too, right?
Yes.
So everybody else gets to say how many municipalities represent. I represent 8 and a portion of another. So I obviously represent a lot of municipalities and the people who live within them. And so I take the charter amendment of these municipalities very seriously. And so would you agree that a charter amendment is something that is obviously very important? And so we want to just make sure that as many people as possible are aware that it is happening?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay, so I just, because I just want to be thoughtful, I want to think through, work with this good bill on the frequency and how we're getting to the people, maybe just, and maybe timeline too, when we're talking about a charter amendment. But I like what we're doing, and that people have changed. So we're not reading newspapers as much anymore, but just still want to make sure that we are actually letting people know. Would you be open to that?
I'd be happy to.
100%.
Great.
This might be calling for a small work
Yeah, a little
group of a
discussion.
few people here to work this through. Any other questions for this? Sarah Washington, you look like you were looking to push a button. Okay, seeing none, that concludes the bill hearing on Senate Bill 157. Thank you. We're going to next move to Senator Walt Stryker. Next up, you stay right there, Senate Bill 166. And you've got 2 sponsor panelists signed up, Claudia Wilson Randall. Is Randall anywhere here? Yep, come on up. And Krista McGee. Okay, that's you. Okay, so we're missing Miss Randall. Sarah Walser, you don't know if
Yeah.
Miss Randall was planning on being here? She
So I
signed
believe
up.
the House hearing might be simultaneous to our own, so she might be across the street.
Okay, well, obviously if she shows up, if not, she wants to submit some written testimony, but we're going to lead off with you, Senator Walt Stryker, on Senate Bill 166.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. All over the nation right now, state legislatures are grappling with the issue of housing affordability. This issue is particularly acute in Maryland, where we have a shortage of at least 85,000 units. As you can imagine, there's no one-size-fits-all approach to this problem. Solving our state's housing shortage will require bold and creative solutions tailored to every individual jurisdiction's needs. In the post-COVID world, the most important and innovative approach to this problem is the concept of adaptive reuse. Adaptive reuse involves the retrofitting and repurposing of an existing building to develop new housing. The COVID-19 pandemic created a unique opportunity to put this concept into practice. Despite record low unemployment rates, the commercial building vacancy rates remain stubbornly high all across our state. These buildings could be repurposed into housing at all price points, thereby easing the housing supply shortages in our respective jurisdictions. Office conversions are the primary purpose behind this bill, but we should note that adaptive reuse is not limited only to traditional commercial buildings. This concept could also apply to empty warehouses, abandoned malls, and so forth. Senate Bill 166 is a straightforward bill that simply makes clear that office conversions and other adaptive reuse projects are eligible for already existing loans and grants administered by the Department of Housing and Community Development. Because this bill doesn't create any new loans or grants or allocate any new funds, instead merely tapping existing programs, there is no fiscal note. Now, to be clear, DHCD has already begun applying some of these loans to adaptive reuse. So why bring the bill? Well, two reasons. First, by codifying the practice, we are expressing a strong policy preference. We're saying that turning vacant office space into housing is an efficient, affordable way to add residents to our community and lower the cost of housing. Codifying adaptive reuse is a roadmap to increasing both prosperity and affordability in the post-COVID world. Two, we are sending a message to industry. The developers who convert abandoned office space are often a very different breed than the traditional home builders who currently access DHCD loans and grants. By codifying adaptive reuse, we are putting up a billboard for industry that their conversions are welcome and supported here in Maryland. As always, Maryland is competing with other states. Many other states have codified loans for office conversions, so it's important that we send a message to industry that Maryland is open for business. In sum, Mr. Chairman, we have a choice. We can do nothing and risk half-abandoned cities with minimal street life and dead nightlife, or we can embrace adaptive reuse, adding residents, lowering costs, increasing affordability, and building prosperity. If you choose the latter, I hope you'll vote favorably on SB 166.
Okay, thank you, Senator Waldstreicher. Any questions for the sponsor? Senator Washington.
Just wanted to say thank you so much for bringing forward this bill. I also want to let the committee know that we did pass a adaptive reuse work group to study it a couple of years ago. It's in our code. So that was, 2021. So I am very happy so thank you so much for taking it right to being law. So that's all I wanted to say.
Any
This is a
additional
great
questions
idea.
for the sponsor? Senator Augustine.
Thank you so much for bringing this. It really is an important piece. I think this is the case, but this does not in any way impede local jurisdictions authority with regard to land use or anything like that. Is that correct?
That's correct. It does not.
Okay, it's simply it's simply providing that guidance that we have this additional tool where it does meet with the local zoning and things like that. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you so much for bringing the bill.
Okay, Senator Watson.
Is this for only commercial or for residential as well?
So the concept of adaptive reuse is to take something that is non-residential and turn it into residential.
Okay. Because my next question was all about HOAs and covenants and all those types of things. Let me see if that answered the other question. Well, if it's commercial, my questions are answered. Thank you.
Any additional questions for sponsor? Okay, thank you. We're going to go to the panelist, sponsor panelists. We've got Krista McGee. You've got 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, members of the committee. I'm Krista McGee with Maryland Realtors. We have mentioned previously to this committee that Maryland has a housing shortage of 120,000 units and climbing. The adaptive reuse of commercial spaces gives us the ability to add some of those much needed housing units. The adaptation of existing commercial spaces can also extend the life of the buildings that exist today while preserving some of the historical features as well as maintain the feel of the surrounding community. Also, it returns buildings which have outlived their original purpose back to a productive use. There have been other cities and states who are actively promoting adaptive reuse in their communities, and we feel that this is a great opportunity for Maryland to join them. Therefore, we respectfully ask for your support of Senate Bill 166.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Ms. McGee? Okay, seeing none. Oh, no, we've got Senator Carozza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Senator Waltz-Stryker, thank you for this bill. As a matter of fact, a group of realtors came up from the Lower Shore and specifically mentioned your bill. So thank you. My question is to our realtor witness today. We, in our conversation today, not only spoke about this bill and the support there, but we also had, we talked about affordable workforce housing in general, and specifically some of the challenges when you represent a seasonal economy, which we are having some, challenges in the, on the Lower Shore. So I wanted to take the opportunity to ask you to take that back for action. I know that we have a new Secretary of Housing and Community Development who's also from the Shore, Jake Day, former mayor of Salisbury. So I actually think we have some opportunities. So I would just ask if on the record, if you would go back and take that for action.
Be my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm told that Ms. Randall is actually on her way from the Budget and Taxation Committee, but in the meantime, we do have one virtual witness. So we've got Doug Ryan. We're going to try to cue Mr. Ryan up here. And hopefully when he's done, we'll have Ms. Randall in the room. We can take it. Mr. Ryan, we can see you, we can hear you. You've got 2.5 minutes. You've signed up favorable. Starting now, 2.5.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. My name is Doug Ryan. I am the Vice President of Policy and Applied Research at Prosperity Now. We are a national nonprofit based in Washington, D.C. that works to build asset and wealth building opportunities for communities across the country. I'm also a 25-year resident of Montgomery County. I spent 13 years at the Housing Opportunities Commission of Montgomery County and I'm a longtime housing professional and advocate. I would request a favorable report out on Senate Bill 166. We believe that this is a really important step forward. It would give a shot in the arm to DHCD's programs and provide guidance and assurance that developers across the state can use DHCD programs and products for this purpose, the adaptive reuse of commercial and other types of buildings, industrial, old motels, schools, and the like, into residential opportunities. We think this is a hugely important opportunity. Maryland has a significant housing shortage, particularly in the area of affordable housing. Our estimates show that over about half of Maryland renters are cost burdened, meaning that they spend more than 30% of their incomes on rent. That is not sustainable. That means they're one crisis away from eviction and possibly homelessness, and that's a crisis that we should not exasperate. Senate Bill 166 can help address some of those issues. We also know that for example, the Washington Council of Governments has indicated that Montgomery County and Prince George's County are lagging well behind Northern Virginia and Washington, D.C. itself in the development of multifamily housing. This is putting a burden on our families, and it is slowing down our economy, as is evident from recent data on the strength of Maryland's economy compared to our peer states. Finally, we know that there is a lot of excess capacity in the non-residential real estate space. Montgomery County has about a 19% vacancy rate in office buildings. It's been stuck there for many years. That's true across the state and other areas. We also know that states and jurisdictions across the country are successfully adapting buildings for residential use. California is doing remarkable work. And in fact, our neighbor in Washington, D.C. is the leading municipality in making other buildings into residential space. Hyattsville and Baltimore City are also doing great work. So we know we have the expertise among lenders, developers, and the nonprofit sector and local officials to get this done. Again, thank you for the opportunity to speak to this. And we strongly support Senate Bill 166.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ryan. Any questions for the witness, Mr. Ryan? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Ryan, for your testimony. And Ms. Randall, you have appeared. Claudia Wilson Randall, why don't you come up? You've signed up favorable. You're part of Senator Waltz-Stryker's
Yes.
sponsor panel, and you've got 2.5 minutes.
Okay.
Good afternoon, members of the EEE Committee. My name is Claudia Wilson Randall. I'm the Executive Director of the Community Development Network of Maryland. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in front of the committee on House Bill 166. As I have spoken before about Maryland's intense need for affordable housing throughout the state, the push for adaptive reuse and retrofitting of buildings throughout the state is a critical piece of the puzzle in increasing the supply of affordable housing and the need for buildings and reusing buildings that are empty and vacant at this time. As I have spoken before, the affordable housing crisis is severe. It will need all sorts of buildings in both urban, suburban, and rural parts of the state. And I think this attempt to reuse buildings in all sorts of districts is a really important piece of the puzzle for Maryland. I want to ask your favorable report for House Bill 166 and encourage you to repurpose the existing inventory of buildings throughout the state of Maryland.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. Any questions for Ms. Randall? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the bill hearing on Senate Bill 166. Thank you, Senator Waldstreicher, for those two bills. For next up, we've got Senator Augustine, Senate Bill 223. And I'm going to call up your sponsored panelists. We've got Denise Gilmore, Charlene Wright, and we have one witness signed up virtual as part of your sponsor panel, but why don't we go with the live witnesses first, and then we'll move to Mr. Mike Gardner, who's waiting online in the queue. So Senator Augustine, you've got the time you need on Senate Bill 223.
Thank you, Chair Feldman and members of the committee. Ms. Wright is not going to be able to be with us today, but we do have Denise Gilmore and of course, Mr. Gardner, who is virtual. Colleagues, Senator Malcolm Augustine coming to you with Senate Bill 223, State Government, State Facilities Changes and Closure Procedures. Colleagues, I will point you to the testimony of Eugenia Stepney that is in your written testimony, where she shares the story of the Southern Maryland pre-release unit, the only such pre-release unit in Southern Maryland, that the Department of Corrections unceremoniously closed in 2021 without consideration of the impact to the community, to the incarcerated and the incarcerated folks' families or the workers. They just closed it. The Department of Health did the same thing when state officials said in September of just last year that the Western Maryland Hospital Center and Deers Head Hospital Center in Salisbury would be closed under a Maryland Department of Health master plan that did not include stakeholder input or transparency to Marylanders around the rationale for the decision. They were just going to do it. You know, as Maryland's population has grown, access to quality state services and particularly physical and mental health care have become increasingly important. When closing or changing our facilities, Maryland state agencies should have a transparent decision-making process to discuss potential impacts to workers at the facility, patients at the facilities, inmates, and the surrounding community. And so the purpose of this bill is to create a uniform process that brings about transparency when state agencies make decisions concerning changes or closures of state facilities. And this will absolutely benefit all of those involved, all the stakeholders and affected by the changes. The legislation specifically establishes specified notice, public hearing, and reporting requirements when a principal department of the executive branch of state government decides to close or make changes. It provides for a timeline in which advocates and all stakeholders to make comment on the outcomes and impacts of any changes or closures to a facility. It expands the notice and hearing to a facility to which has 25 or more state employees that are regularly assigned. It requires a clear and decent transition plan for patients and their families, employees, and other fiscal considerations. And most importantly, I think this brings about transparency within the process while we giving the state agencies their flexibility. We provide make sure they give adequate notification as well to the exclusive bargaining representatives. And we already know that we need this greater transparency such that, decision-making process that comes to these facility changes or closures, don't just have these negative impacts on our communities and all the stakeholders that are a part of it. The current law right now, it does provide some notice of a hearing to members of the General Assembly whose district the facility is in and to public, but with no information on what timeline for when hearings can and would be held. There's no reporting mechanism or feedback post-hearing on next steps in the process, nor is there a justification in the General Assembly for the advocates, exclusive bargaining representatives, or the public on the reasoning on the decision on why a facility change or closure is happening. The process varies from agency to agency. There's no uniformity, and it's just kind of like all over the place. And so what this bill does is bring those things together in a unified way that makes it clear, provides transparency, and so we're really looking to make sure that we're able to do that for the betterment of the folks of the state. Now, there are a couple of folks who came to me with some friendly amendments. You'll see inside of the packet that they expressed some thoughts that they wanted to see change, including the Maryland Developmental Disabilities Coalition. Asked for changes in the language for the purpose of the report and to insert language to make sure that the legislation will not impede the safety of patients, inmates, residents, or staff, and ensuring legislation encompasses and includes in the plans the welfare of our patients, inmates, or residents. And we have incorporated that into a amendment that is also a part of your packet, where we already put together the amendments that meet with these requests. And there was also a request that was in the packet. Note that you'll see that they also asked for the change of a word on page 4, the amendment that we agreed to change that language. The bill said on page 4, the word was justifying versus page 4, line 1 of the bill. We are open to changing the word from justifying to explaining. There was a request from the Developmental Disabilities Coalition to do just that. And you have to forgive me that the amendment that I submitted does not include that one word, but do know that we have worked that out. We've come to an agreement with the stakeholders, including the Maryland Mental Health Association, by virtue of the changes that we made, where we're including language about patients in the above, that we should all be in alignment. And I would ask for you all's favorable report with the sponsors amendment on Senate Bill 223. Happy to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Okay, thank you, Senator Augustine. Any questions for the sponsor, Senator Augustine? Senator Carozza.
Chair, and thank you, Senator, for this bill. And since you did reference Deer's Head, and I have a little bit of knowledge of that, but didn't live the whole process. So, I agree that you can always improve this process, mainly so there's not misinformation out there, and then speculation that staff are losing jobs, services aren't providing to our constituents. So I agree with the general thrust of this bill. I'm glad to see you're open to amendments. 2 questions. One would be, you referenced to make sure that the department would have enough flexibility. So I want to just ask you to expound on that, because I think that's important when, for example, with Deer's Head, the background of that is there were all kinds of environmental and asbestos issues of why sections of that were closed at one point and then reopened. And so the department definitely needed flexibility actually for the safety and health of both patients and employees. So since you actually referenced that term, flexibility for the department, I just wanted to just ask you to maybe flush that out a little bit.
Okay, thank you, Senator, for that question. There's 2 things that I would want to refer to with that. Number one, the flexibility is that all this is doing is really setting out an opportunity for public engagement. It doesn't prevent them from actually executing on a plan. This is allowing for the kinds of transparency that you talked about so that they would receive the input from the folks in our constituents and everybody else, but that it does not take away their authority to act. The second thing that I will share with you is that there is an additional amendment. The amendment, it's there in case that there was a potential for pose a risk to health or safety of those who are associated with the entity. That is the amendment that was put in, such that if that were the case, then we could act more quickly in a process where that is the case. That was what that amendment was about. Okay.
Any additional questions for sponsor, Senator Augustine? Okay, seeing none. Got Denise Gilmore, part of the sponsor panel. Denise, you've got 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Denise Gilmore, and I'm a legislative director with AFSCME Council 3. We represent state employees and employees at our public higher education institutions here in Maryland. The Senator did a wonderful job explaining this bill and, why we think it is so important. So I can actually, keep my remarks relatively brief, but I wanted to reiterate that this bill is not about weighing into the policy decision on if a facility should stay open or not. We're just looking for a standard process because right now, as it stands, our members in juvenile services, our members in, human services and the Department of Health, when they encounter these situations where their agency wants to close, they're all experiencing drastically different things in terms of the communication they get, in terms of, the plans that are put in place for them before the closure is made final. Our members obviously also see this from the perspective of the clientele that they serve. There were particularly some recent attempted closures that really affected our members because they felt like there weren't adequate plans for, the clients in those situations where the closures were coming up. So again, our only goal with this, and I'm happy we've been able to work with, some members of the advocate, community on this too, is, to make this a good government process where there are, an opportunity for public feedback and transparency when the state does decide to make these decisions. So that's what we're approaching this with. And, we certainly would appreciate very much a favorable report on SB 223. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the testimony. Any questions for Ms. Gilmore on Senate Bill 223? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Ms. Gilmore. We're going to now go to Mr. Gardner, Mike Gardner, who's appearing virtually. We're going to get you, Mr. Gardner, zoomed in here.
Good.
Start your video, yes, start.
Okay, there you are. We see you, we hear you. Mr. Gardner, you've got 2.5 minutes. You've signed up favorable.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Mike Gardner and I'm a member of AFSCME Local 354. I work at Western Maryland Hospital Center. This legislation is personal to me. I just experienced an attempted closure of my facility that left patients and staff in limbo for months with no communication from management on what was going to happen with our facility, the patients, and our jobs. If this hospital closure plan would have gone forward on January 1st. We serve a medically fragile patient population, and we have staff that has worked at the hospital for decades. For over 65 years, Western Maryland Hospital Center has been a pillar in the Hagerstown community. No one wanted this hospital to close. In fact, a work group convened in 2017 at the behest of the legislature to make recommendations on how to rebuild it and expand the care state employees give at the facility. But despite that, the Maryland Department of Health still tried to expedite the closure of this hospital last year. Luckily, the BPW intervened to stop the expedited closure of our hospital, but we came very close to losing this treasure without an adequate plan for what would happen to the patients and staff if it were to close. The surrounding neighborhood was concerned about the impact of having an abandoned state hospital in their backyard, and they were never brought in on the plans either. I believe privatization is bad, but most of all, I believe that closing facilities without an adequate plan for staff and patients is even worse. Please support SB 223. It's important for transparency and to make sure we aren't leaving anyone behind when these decisions are made. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gardner. Any questions for the witness, Mr. Gardner? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the bill hearing on Senate Bill 223.
Yeah, sounds good.
Oh, I'm sorry. What's your name?
Andy Call with the Maryland EEE Coalition.
And you signed up?
I did. I signed up for both. I have my paper.
I'm sorry. Okay, okay, come on up. I apologize. I'm not sure that we got you signed up here properly. So
Okay.
take a seat and
Yeah.
tell us your name, and then you've got 2.5 minutes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Chairman Feldman, Vice Chair Kagan, and members of the committee. My name is Andy Culp, and I'm here on behalf of the Maryland Developmental Disabilities Coalition. The Maryland Developmental Disabilities Coalition is comprised of 5 organizations that are statewide, all supporting the rights and quality of life of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And we're here in support of Senate Bill 223. I'm here on behalf of them in support of Senate Bill 223 as amended. We believe that transparency in state government is really important to provide the time, information, and opportunity for stakeholders to give feedback. Over time in Maryland, institutions have been transitioned and closed with success. Rosewood Institution in 2009 is an example of a successful closure of an institution. It involved feedback from stakeholders and a timeline and plans for the people who live there and staff. I think all of the staff who worked at the institution had the opportunity for continued employment, either in another facility or in the community. But I also know that that hasn't always been the case, and transitions and closures definitely should not happen in the dark. So I'll just say that we think it's a good bill, that it provides structure and codifies what should happen and what should happen in order, while also providing the flexibility that you might need in the case of an emergency. That amendment that's there says a governmental agency or judicial body determines there's an emergency situation that poses a risk to the health or safety of patients, inmates, residents, or staff of a state facility. They may modify the times that are required in the subsection while still having to provide the reports in a timeline and notice. So it does give flexibility where flexibility is needed. What if there's an environmental situation that happened, the radon or carcinogens and things like that. So that was really important to us. Lastly, I'd like to just note that we would love this is just for the record, this isn't for an amendment, but we would love to make sure that any plans for the facility after its closure include how the state intends to maximize the proceeds from any sale of a state facility and lands. That wasn't the case when Rosewood was sold. It was sold for $1 to Stevenson University, and same with Spring Grove Hospital Center, sold for $1 to Shepherd Pratt. That money is supposed to go into a community services trust fund for future services and community services for people with disabilities. So it's really important to us that the state look at that and look at how that money should go into the fund that was created in statute.
Okay, and my apologies, you did sign up properly favorable with an amendment, so I want to say that. And then I'd also encourage you, if you haven't already done so, with that amendment language, make sure you share it with Senator Augustine, sponsor, and maybe you've already done that, but okay. So
Senator Augustine has accepted it.
okay, fair enough. That's it.
the
Okay, we're
friendly.
talking about the same amendment. Okay, fair enough. Any additional questions for the witness? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the bill hearing on Senate Bill 223, which brings us to our final bill of the day, Senator Washington, Senate Bill 251. And we do have Jeremy Browning signed up as your sponsor panelist. And I think that's the only member of your sponsor panel. We do have some other folks signed up in person, both favorable and one unfavorable. So Senator Washington, Senate Bill 251, take the time you need to present the bill.
Thank you, Chairman, and it's an honor to present my first bill of the session in this committee and with my new members. It's an honor to provide support and oral testimony for Senate Bill 251. And it is making alterations to the existing Commission on LGBTQ affairs. I appreciate this opportunity to do this. This bill does three things. It changes the name of the Commission on LGBTQ affairs. It increases the membership and it staggers the term. The commission was established in law in 2021, so just 2 years ago, and it passed this committee and passed the Senate and the House and was enacted into law. The commission members have as their charge under the legislation to be composed of up to 15 individuals who reflect the gender, racial, ethnic, and geographic diversity of the state. The members are charged with understanding the full range of issues facing the community and for advocating for solutions to the problems facing the community. Very much like every other commission, identity commission that Maryland currently has in statute. The commission members have been meeting and they would like to increase the number of the board to 21, making it more consistent with other commissions. The bill removes the unnecessary word women. It says women and LGBTQ. This group, women are not statutorily excluded from the commission. Therefore, it is redundant. And finally, they'd like to set the staggered terms for the new commission members and future commission members starting in October 1st to stagger membership so that everyone is not leaving at the same time. The commission, and I agree, believes that by expanding the name, additionally, the name of LGBTQ to add I and A and calling it LGBTQIA+ affairs is more inclusive and that it reflects more of the full range of identities within this community, within our community. I support this bill as a step towards creating a more diverse and stronger commission to help ensure that all voices in the LGBTQ+I community and their families can be heard and their needs addressed. Chair, I'd like to introduce the lead proponent. This bill was requested, as I said, by the commission. The administrative director is Jeremy Browning. And with that, I thank you for this opportunity to talk about the bill, and I look for us to recommend a favorable report.
Okay, since you mentioned Mr. Browning, why don't we just go right to Mr. Browning and then we'll open it up to questions for either one of you. Okay, Mr. Browning, you've got 2.5 minutes.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. And thank you, Senator Washington, for your testimony. I want to thank you for the opportunity to provide informational testimony on SB 251 on behalf of the Maryland Commission on LGBTQ Affairs. My name is Jeremy Browning. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the administrative director. I would like to commend the members of the General Assembly for their work on behalf of our LGBTQIA+ community and their families. Senate Bill 251 aims to make the commission more inclusive and representative of the diverse LGBTQIA+ communities in Maryland. The bill would rename the commission to be the Maryland Commission on LGBTQIA+ Affairs, reflecting the inclusion of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, intersex, agender, asexual, aromantic, and additional identities. As Senator Washington mentioned, the bill would increase the number of commissioners from 15 to 21, which is consistent with the size of many of the commissions in the Governor's Office of Community Initiatives. And additionally, the bill removes the use of women and LGBTQIA+ persons, since women are already included in the acronym. So with this information, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, I conclude my testimony, and I'm optimistic that the commission will work hard to have a tremendous success in improving the lives of our communities and their families. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. So we've got any questions for sponsor Senator Washington or Mr. Browning? We've got, we'll start with Vice Chair Kagan and then we'll go to Senator Gallion. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Washington. Thank you, Mr. Browning. Senator Washington, I was going to ask about the word women, which totally struck me as weird being in here. You said it removes it. I just want to flag on page 4, lines 1 through 4, actually concerning women and is still in there. So maybe that's just a drafting error and that can be addressed in an amendment.
That there is, thank you so much. There is an amendment which I'll be requesting.
Thank
I
you.
apologize. Thank
Okay,
you.
and then my other question, page 2, lines 26 and 27. I just wondered whether you guys, to the extent practical, reflect the age, gender, sexual orientation, racial, ethnic, socioeconomic, and geographic diversity of the state. I wonder if you wanted to include gender identity, which seems possibly missing.
Yes, that would make sense there.
Okay, just a suggestion if we want to consider that. Thank you, Senator Washington. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Gallion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator, it was either last year or the year before, I believe it was during a voting here session we had, that I asked you a question about the queue.
Right, yes.
And it was my understanding at that time you told me that basically that kind of covered everything that wasn't covered in the first 4 letters. So why do you need the I and A? Couldn't you just have a Q plus? So what's the difference? What's happened the last year or two since you answered that question for me?
So apparently I went from being on the cutting edge of how our community identifies to being an elder. And so that's what happened in the 2 years. So there are members of the community that, and again, that where this also frankly, plus is the perhaps hope that it will in fact include that. But there are a significant number of people that identify in the I and the A. We were out of the loop on it. And so we're fixing it now.
But reading the bill, it looks like there's 3 A's really. So is there a concern? I mean, with different acronyms, you have so many, is there a concern that at some point you're going to get too many to be hard for people to remember?
Yeah, that's why the
everything in
plus
order?
does it, right? It's A plus, so everything else should be
So
included.
wouldn't just a plus at the end that wouldn't be sufficient to take care of? Because you're going to have,
So-
really, there's,
Right.
let's see, an I, A, and then additional identities. I mean, you're like 4 A's at the end of that, and you're getting up to about that point, about 10 letters.
Okay. So part of the practice, particularly in our community and people who do all types of identity work, is really not to dictate to individuals who are seeking protection under the law how they should identify themselves. There's a clear identified community that is different from LGBTQ, and therefore I and A is there, and then the plus is added to that. I can't say to you in 10 years, it might be different. Frankly, I would hope that maybe at some time it won't be necessary to have to fight for protections under the law to ensure that you can continue to marry, that you can have a job, that you're not discriminated against, that you're not beaten or killed. But until that day, we as lesbians, as gays, as bisexuals, as transgendered, as queer and questioning people need to have a place and have established a place under the former administration to begin to address these issues as well as economic issues. So thank you for your question.
Okay, any additional questions? Okay, seeing none, we've got 4 witnesses signed up in person. I'm going to read them off. Isabella Shykoff, Les Blinder, Jamie Grace Alexander, Camilla Reynolds Dominguez, and those are 4 witnesses. All 4 have signed up in person. So would you come up?
Good afternoon.
We'll
Uh,
start with you. Tell us your name so we know
I'm
who we
sorry.
have up here.
Yes. My name is Isabella Scheikoff. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I come to you today to speak in favor of Senate Bill 251 as a young, gay legislative committee staffer serving in the Maryland General Assembly in the late 80s. I can tell you I was not out. And I was not out because I was afraid. I was afraid it could impact negatively my career. I was always thinking about my personal safety generally. And I worried about whether I would be kicked out of my apartment if I were to act more out and more myself. Now, I know a lot has changed since the 80s, but I would submit to you that there's still work to be done. So I'm glad that the commission exists, and I'm here to support the expansion of the definition of what is a growing diversity of the greater gay community. It's a simple bill, and I think it's pretty straightforward. Some of it's cleanup, but we have work to do, and so I urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll go through the whole panel, and then we'll open up for questions. So state your name, sir, and you've got 2.5 minutes.
Sure, thank you. I'm Philip Westry, the Executive Director of Free State Justice. I will be speaking on behalf of Free State in lieu of Jamie Grace Alexander.
Okay, so you had 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. First, thank you for letting me speak on this issue. And just a brief about Free State Justice. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. We're based in Baltimore, but we serve LGBTQ folks across the state. Our goal is to improve the lives of LGBTQIA people. And we do that through direct services and community education and empowerment services. The reason that we're here is because LGBTQIA plus folks remain particularly vulnerable to marginalization, which is reflected in increased levels of poverty, public health disparities, and victimization when it comes to interactions with the police and in their intimate relationships. We believe that this commission is important, and we think the changes that are being made will help better reflect the broader community. So we support the expansion of the membership, especially as it looks to get folks who are in different geographic locations, especially in Western Maryland, Southern Maryland, and folks who live on the Eastern Shore. As an organization, our goal remains focused on making sure that Maryland is a safe place for all folks who identify across those letters. And we think that the work of the commission will forward that. And for that, we urge for a favorable report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to the next witness. Why don't you tell us your name, and you've got 2.5 minutes.
Wonderful. Thank you. Greetings, Honorable Chair Feldman, Vice Chair Kagan, and the members of the committee. My name is Lee Blinder. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm the executive director of Trans Maryland. Trans Maryland is a multiracial, multi-gender community power building organization for Maryland's trans community. We run the largest name and gender marker change program in the state, serving folks with the practical process as well as assisting with the cost for those who cannot afford it. And we are deeply proud to serve as Maryland's transgender rights organization. In addition to my work with Trans Maryland, I also serve as the chair of the policy committee for the Maryland Commission on LGBTQ Affairs. And in my capacity as the executive director of Trans Maryland, and also through my work with the commission, we ask for a favorable report on this bill. I also really appreciate Vice Chair Kagan, your amendments, and also Senator Washington, those amendments. We would support those as well. The LGBTQIA plus community has really lacked representation on the state level, and the creation of the Maryland Commission on LGBTQ affairs was an essential first step in order to address these significant barriers that are facing our community. SB 251 will make a very few small but very important changes in order to assist the commission to fully realize our potential in order to act as the mouthpiece for the community and in order to reach Maryland's governmental and state agencies and ensure that each and every one of the members of our community are able to find themselves represented and served in an appropriate manner. These changes include modernizing the acronym to use more inclusive language to reflect intersex, agender, asexual, and aromantic persons, expanding the number of the commissioners in order to be consistent, as mentioned, with the size of other similar commissions, and also to add this additional important detail about the qualifications for membership to the commission to ensure that the commission reflects the socioeconomic diversity of the state. We urge a favorable report with those suggested amendments to SB 251 to ensure that the Commission on LGBTQ Affairs will embody the words of the first Black governor of Maryland, Governor Moore, who reaffirmed his pledge in his recent State of the State to mention that we will leave no one behind, and enables this commission to adequately reflect the diversity of the community that we represent. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for any of the three witnesses? Okay, seeing that, none. The only additional witness signed up is one witness unfavorable, Vince McAvoy. Is Vince McAvoy here in the room?
Yes, thank you so much, Senator. Can you hear me all right?
Okay, I apologize. I guess you did sign up virtual. So Mr. McAvoy, you've got 2.5 minutes and you're signed up unfavorable.
Very kind of you. Thank you so much. This commission was started back a couple of years ago from HB 130, and I appealed to HGO at the time to testify on the bill. They said, no, you cannot testify. This is a sponsor-only bill. We can see from the creation of this commission, which came about around the time of COVID, that this is about sex. Sex is in the naming of the groups highlighted here. And I want to highlight just what has happened just this couple of weeks with regards to Annapolis and bills being brought on account of this community. We had CSE introducing sex and homosexuality at toddler age. That was insisted by delegates in Ways and Means. You had a bill to legalize bestiality and perverse acts. Again, almost entirely sponsored by homosexual and transgender community. And then just an hour ago, you had a bill brought to remove the ability to prosecute homosexuals, not accidentally, deliberately and provable in court, from infecting others with HIV, knowingly. This community is not responding to the problems it's causing. This particular commission has not responded to these problems. The expansion of this is not what is needed. If anything, it should be shut down and reformulated. And I want to say that where there's discord and the failure, these problems are caused by that community. When parents are in uproar, and I'm speaking in the Baltimore region, this is not out west. This is what they are highlighting with respect to offensive exposure of sexuality to 5-year-olds. This is unconscionable. We've never done this. We don't do it for any other group. Since homosexuality, adultery, prostitution, pornography undermine the foundations of the family, the basis of society, the state is entitled to use its power to ban or limit them, not expand and promote them. And finally, all Marylanders do not promote these variant lifestyles. The choice to not promote may be personal, it may be cultural, it may be spiritual, it may be seeing something as societally harmful. Looking at the gross HIV statistics in DC, 34%, Maryland falling at 13%. This is America, it's their right. So I do thank you for listening. I am available for questions.
Okay, any questions for Mr. McAvoy? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the bill hearing on Senate Bill 251, and that concludes our bill hearings for today. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the committee.